Welcome to the Alpha Human Podcast. I'm your host, Lawrence Rosenberg, and today's guest is Morley Robbins. Morley is a renowned figure in the world of health and wellness. He's the creative mind behind the Root Cause Protocol and the founder of the Magnesium Advocacy Group. And he brings a wealth of knowledge from his academic background with a degree in biology and an MBA in healthcare administration. And Morley's journey in the field of health extends through various disciplines, including wellness, coaching, nutritional counseling, functional diagnostic nutrition. And he's widely recognized as the Magnesium Man. I love that moniker, the Magnesium Man. Morley has dedicated a significant part of his career to researching magnesium's crucial role in our bodies, and his groundbreaking work explores the complex interplay between essential minerals such as magnesium, but also iron and copper. And he delivers revelatory insights into overcoming illness and promoting optimal health. Morley, welcome to the show.
Lawrence, thank you. Looking forward to our discussion. That's a big $64 word, revelatory. I like that.
I try.
Yeah.
So, Morley, I wanted to bring you on the podcast to cover a very particular topic. Your knowledge is vast. I've read a lot of your material, and I haven't even scratched the surface, I feel, even though I've read a lot of it. But I want to cover and zero in on iron toxicity and cancer, which no doubt is going to branch off into several other areas of interest, because when it comes to health and biology and human physiology, everything is interconnected in some way. However, before we begin with the questions, why don't we give the audience a brief primer on your background and how you became so prolific in delivering insights around an area, let's call it minerals, just for a moment. But how did you become so prolific and profound and knowledgeable about an area that is rarely discussed as the root cause of many chronic illnesses?
Well, I can assure you it was not something I set out. I came into it through the back door. But real quick, and many people have heard the story, but just to put it into context, I grew up in a very sickly family, like a lot of people do. Mom was an alcoholic. Dad was manic depressive with schizophrenia. 2 years before he ran away from home, he had double pneumonia and an enlarged heart. And what shocked me, he died when he was 54 years old. I'm 71. So it's interesting to look back. And what I'm coming to learn now is the organ that was weak that caused all of his problems. It's the spleen. Maybe if we have time, we can talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
But in that context, my older sister, grew up to be a nurse. So I was supposed to become a doctor and take care of the family. And got to college and went, whoa, this is a lot of hard work. And I didn't align with the model of being a gearhead. So long story short, I went a different path. I still applied to medical schools. I applied to 18, and I got rejected by all 18. 12 in one day. That was a very interesting experience to get 12 letters. But undaunted, I decided to become a hospital administrator. Went to business school, and took to that like a duck to water. It was just like, oh, finally I can talk about stuff. I can study stuff that makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
And because the science didn't make sense then, back in my 20s, I was like, what are you talking about? And spent 12 years working as a hospital executive, and then 20 years as a hospital consultant.
Okay.
And for 20 years, I was pulling a suitcase behind my back through airports and developed what's called frozen shoulder. I literally could not lift my hand above my waist.
Okay.
And that got me to a health food store, pleading with them to give me something. And they told me to go see Dr. Liz. I went, I don't do witchcraft. Give me some supplements. So, long story short, Dr. Liz is now my wife, and she introduced me to a phrase I'd never heard of. Um, after she healed my frozen shoulder by adjusting the inside of the jaw, she went into my mouth with the full weight of her body pressed on what's called the pterygoid muscle.
Mm-hmm.
And as she did, my arm lifted. Well, that's as close to a miracle as I'd ever witnessed. And she talked about the innate healer, the healer within. And I looked at her in disbelief. I didn't say anything. I thought to myself, there's an innate healer. Why do we have millions of doctors around the world? And so I set out to find out who is this innate healer. And it culminated in my book that many people have found interesting, Cure Your Fatigue. And what most people don't know, what most practitioners don't know, is that there's 32,000 conditions in the Merck manual. It's a lot of conditions.
Yeah.
All of them start with what's called cellular energy deficiency. Well, you and I would call that fatigue. Turns out it's the number one reason why people go see their doctor is because they have fatigue. Number one reason. And so I thought it would be entertaining to understand that, really get behind what is this innate healer all about. And it turns out it's bioavailable copper. And I use that phrase very specifically because the meme that we've been raised on in the last century on this planet is you're anemic and you're copper toxic. We know that. We know what the problem is. So that turns out that that meme is a lie. And everyone on the planet is a copper desert. Because they're a copper desert, they're iron toxic. And that's playing in the backdrop of our discussion. We're having this dialogue about iron and cancer. That statement alone will confuse about 90% of your audience because most people are convinced they need more iron,
right,
and they need to get rid of this pesky copper. And if I were Satan, that's exactly what I would want people to think. And so the whole paradigm of healing, it doesn't matter whether it's conventional or alternative, even the naturopaths, allopaths, osteopaths, traditional Chinese medicine, they don't know that copper is the general and iron is the grunt. Iron's the foot soldier. And our entire metabolism rests on a healthy dynamic between copper, the general, and iron, the grunt. And basically, 80% of the 80% of the iron in our body is a waiter carrying oxygen. It's hemoglobin, myoglobin. They're carrying oxygen to the tissue in hopes that there's enough copper there to activate that oxygen, turn it into water so that energy can be released. Energy molecules, currency of our cells is ATP.
That's
I
right.
guess spell currency right. CU-RRENCY. You see the symbol for copper again.
Right.
And copper is the driver to create energy, and copper is the driver to clear exhaust. Copper is the driver to combat enemies. And I could go on for about 15 minutes talking about what copper does that nobody knows about.
Well, we'll get to that because when I first heard this idea, it was from you, and so.
So what made you stay with it? That's what I want to know. Why did you stay with it? Because it's such a heretical idea, but something caught your imagination and you wanted to know more. You wanted to scratch the surface.
Yeah, what kept me with it when I heard that And it's really funny you say that, because as I was learning about this, again, reading your articles, listening to you on a few podcasts, but initially what it was is I heard you mention iron toxicity. And I had learned a while ago, not too long ago, but a while ago, in spending an inordinate amount of my time on a daily basis, early in the morning, doing my research into cancer. We'll talk about why, but I had come to find out that iron was a driver of cancer.
Well, let me
And
make a suggestion real quick. In the same way that I talk about bioavailable copper,
mhm,
I would invite you to change your thinking and language around cancer and
mhm.
always refer to cancer metabolism. There is no disease.
Gotcha. Yep.
Disease does not exist. But as soon as you say cancer, your psyche goes into a state of fear.
Yeah, and I guess that's less for me,
Yeah,
given how long I've lived in dealing with it and figuring it out,
right,
and less for people who have not. So when they hear cancer,
right.
absolutely.
Go into a state of fear.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. So, okay, so so here's my question. Many people link iron and iron supplements. So let's rewind a bit and get into the history of iron, because many people link iron and iron supplements with positive health outcomes, such as they fortify cereals, right,
Right,
with iron,
sure, right.
or the administration of iron supplements to pregnant women to prevent anemia, right? So when you hear iron, everyone thinks of iron being a good thing. Popeye eats spinach, right?
Right.
However, there's a critical but frequently overlooked aspect concerning iron, right? Which is the risk of iron overload. And despite its common perception, uh, despite iron's common perception as a vital dietary component, iron overload is surprisingly prevalent and poses significant health risks, as I can personally attest to, especially with respect to cancer. But before we get into iron's role in cancer, I want to
Right.
start by asking you this. Why is iron seen as an essential part of human health to the degree that as a society, we're obsessed with supplementing it? How and where did that whole thing start?
Around the First World War. So what's important is the backdrop behind you is black and white.
Yes.
And what everyone needs to be aware of is that we're in an era now where black is white and white is black. Everything's backwards.
Mm,
And so many of your listeners may be familiar with the book 1984. A lot of us had to read it in high school,
that's right.
hard reading. So you got to do the mathematics of 1984. The book was published in 1948. The inverse, 48, 84. So what happens when you subtract 48 from 84? You get 36.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if you add 36, 84? Oh, you get 2020. And so that year represents the start of the totalitarian state. It's very important for people to understand that what the insanity that we were exposed to in
Mm-hmm.
2020
Mm-hmm.
all planned probably a century before.
Mm-hmm.
People don't like to think about that,
Right.
but again, that book is about black becoming white, white becoming black, citizens becoming enemies of the state. Very important book. If you haven't read it, you need to go back, take a weekend to read it, and then you will understand the world that we're living now in 2023. It'll make so much more sense. So the issue is, when did iron become so essential?
Mm.
So before there was the UN, it was called the League of Nations.
Okay.
right? League of Nations, and they were worried about people's health back then after the First World War. I mean, it's kind of comical when you think about the atrocity of that conflict, the number of millions of people who died because of the First World War, and then suddenly the League of Nations is worried about people's health.
Right.
But in any event, what surfaced was, and I've never really found the original source study, but what surfaced back in the day, back in the early 1920s, was that iron deficiency was a serious problem. And why would we question that? I mean, it's just there's no basis for that back then. Well, what I did find was how they arrived at that conclusion. Very comical. I mean, you have to have a certain sense of humor to find after in it. But in any event, um, they studied pregnant women. Now, what's important for the listeners to understand is that at any given time in society, 1% of the populace is pregnant.
Okay.
1% is pregnant. And they studied that 1% to draw sweeping conclusions about the other 99%. Makes no sense to you or me, but that's what they did. And so they studied pregnant women, and there's something that happens in the second half of the pregnancy. It's called hemodilution. You may have heard that. A lot of people have not. What happens is the woman who's pregnant, let me back up, woman who's not pregnant will have a hemoglobin or between 12 and 13.
Okay.
It might go up to 13 and a half, 12 to 13. But about the second half of the pregnancy, the hemoglobin drops down. And there's less hemoglobin for the amount of blood volume that the woman is carrying. Well, what's really happening is that hemoglobin is being moved to the infant. The infant gets older because the infant needs that capacity. And Mother Nature knows that if there's too much iron in the mother's body, she can't make breast milk. Iron is going to block the synthesis of breast milk.
Okay.
It's really, really important to know that. And so what they did in the 1920s is they studied pregnant women in the second half of their trimester, second half of their pregnancy. And what they noted was that, wow, their hemoglobin's low. It's exactly what Mother Nature wants, but it's not what the system wants. And so they started a campaign to not just inoculate the 1%, they decided to inoculate the other 99% and created this myth that everyone is iron deficient. What people need to understand is that the number one element on planet Earth, 36% of the Earth's composition, iron. What they love to talk about is the crust of the Earth.
Right.
Oh, it's third or fourth. Let's talk about the planet in its entirety. 36% of it is iron. There's a big molten core of iron in the middle. And everyone likes to blow past that and then create this illusion that, well, gosh, wait a minute. So iron's the number one element. And prior to 2020, Lawrence, I would have argued that humans were the most evolved species. Now I'm not so sure.
Right.
But in order to accept that iron deficiency anemia exists, what you have to believe is that the most evolved species on the planet, humans, has lost the natural ability to metabolize the number one element on the planet. It doesn't pass the sniff test. It is impossible that the most evolved species would have lost that. And as you get into the research, which I have ad nauseum, you find out that in fact it's copper that regulates the iron that enables the human to metabolize iron. And that's not a one and done Google search. That takes years
Right.
of teasing the information to find out that truth. Well, most people don't have the curiosity, spell it right, put a hyphen between the U and the R. They don't have the curiosity, or they don't have the discipline to get to the truth. Well, something about it really bothered me. And I really wanted to find out what was going on. And you talk about iron fortification. Turns out that in 1969, no, excuse me, back up. So everything started after the First World War.
Mm-hmm.
Then in 1941, in the dark of night, during the beginning of initial stages of the World War, we hadn't gotten into the war, but Europe and England was in the thick of it.
Mm-hmm.
They decided to add iron filings, not organic iron, literally iron filings,
Right.
to the wheat flour in the UK, the US, and Canada. And that went on. And then in 1969, the FDA wanted to triple the amount of iron filings, a 300% increase. And this is profiled in a wonderful book by an iron toxicologist named Jim Moon. It's called Iron, the Most Toxic Metal.
Okay.
He likes to call a spade a spade. And in 1969, 28 scientists from around the world came to Washington, D.C. and asked one question. What are you trying to do? Help people? You don't put iron filings in the food system. And today, in the modern era of 2023, there's 9 different forms of iron that have been added to the U.S. food system. How many of them cause cancer? All 9.
Right.
Not my assertion. Jim Moon, who's an expert in iron toxicology,
Mm.
that chapter, I think it's chapter 3, I had to read it 5 times to really process what he was saying. The footnotes are unbelievable. Now, tragically, Jim Moon died when he was a year older than I am.
Okay.
And it's a tragic loss to the world because he was a genius. But the point is, this myth that iron is missing has been going on for the better part of 100 years. Most people believe that they are anemic because they were told they were anemic by their doctor, who
Mm-hmm.
was trained to believe that people are anemic because the doctor never heard the word copper or bioavailable copper in all of their classroom and clinical training. And that's why we have the crisis that we have today, because out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
If you don't know about something, missing information equals missing truth. You just don't know. And that's what we find ourselves. And that's why these conversations that we're having are so important, because people know there's something wrong. They
Mm.
don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've heard from really hundreds of people, when they start to hear me talk about it, it's like they sit up and they go, that makes so much sense.
Right.
But to hone in on that truth, then they begin to align with why they've gotten fatigued, how they've gotten fatigued, what's been missing, and it really begins to
Yeah.
bring their body back into balance.
So, I mean, that's fascinating from a historical perspective, and you're right. Uh, this is not something that, even if you start to research iron
Yeah,
and health, you're
yeah.
still not going to come across copper and this idea that you put forward. And I spent a massive amount of my time researching, and it took me
Oh, sure.
a
Oh, I know.
while to eventually stumble upon you and this insight and this information. And then once you have that key and you start doing research and you link these things, like you said, you're like, my God, this all makes sense. So here's the thing. So here's what started me down this road. So I was diagnosed with cancer 7.5 years ago. Chromophobe kidney cancer, which is a rare form of renal cell carcinoma that accounts for only about 5% of cases. And the doctors found I had a large grapefruit-sized 14-centimeter tumor, which I had removed along with my left kidney. And then 1.5 years ago, I had another chromophobe tumor.
The left kidney is significant. We'll come back to that.
Okay. A year and a half ago, I had another chromophobe tumor removed, this time from my liver. But following my initial diagnosis, I immersed myself in researching cancer, how to heal, how to thrive, and my investigation immediately led me to the Warburg Effect. And I became fascinated by the idea that cancer cells undergo this metabolic shift from oxidizing sugar for energy to fermenting sugar via glycolysis. However, further exploration revealed that iron metabolism is significantly upregulated in kidney cancer. In fact, iron plays a crucial role in virtually all tumor hallmarks, and not just in renal cancer. They find altered iron metabolism is a feature observed in many tumors, probably all tumors, if they look for it. And so I've become fascinated with the idea that iron is at the roots of cancer somehow. And I did a number of episodes on this. And then I finally came upon your articles, and I saw that you've been ringing this damn alarm bell for a very long time. Mm-hmm. So can you share your thoughts on iron's role in causing cancer, as well as in promoting the survival and growth of cancer cells?
Right. So again, what's important for the listener to understand is that, again, there is no cancer,
right?
But there is cancer metabolism.
Mm-hmm.
So that early life on this planet, so well, let's back up. There was a time when there was no oxygen on this planet.
Right.
And again, we don't need to offend people about time frame. You know, a day could have been 1 billion years, who knows what. But the point is, several billion years ago, or maybe several days ago, oxygen started to appear in the primordial sea and then work its way into the atmosphere. And we're breathing air right now that has 21% oxygen. Back then, when there was 1/10 of 1%, 1/10 of 1%, it wiped out 99% of life on the planet because it was anaerobic. Life forms could not tolerate oxygen. All it took was 1/10 of 1%. Boom. It's called the Great Oxygen Event. What came to save life forms on the planet were 3 chemicals. One, something called cytochrome C oxidase. And it's an enzyme that runs the mitochondria. And it's run by copper. But that's the enzyme where oxygen gets turned into 2 molecules of water so that ATP can be released. It's very, very important. Second chemical, melatonin. Melatonin goes all the way back.
Wow.
And it's a chemical that's found inside the mitochondria. It's not just a sleep aid, wink, wink. It's an antioxidant. It's the master antioxidant inside the mitochondria. Glutathione is the master antioxidant inside the cell.
Yes.
And ceruloplasmin is the master antioxidant inside our body. So those are terms and concepts that people maybe never heard of. But there's a third chemical that came to our rescue. And you've heard of it.
What's that?
It's called cholesterol.
Right. Absolutely.
So it turns out that it takes 11 molecules of oxygen to make 1 molecule cholesterol.
Mm.
And that in a state of copper deficiency, cholesterol levels will rise. scientists have figured that out. He's an MD, PhD. His name is Leslie Clavey, still living. I think he'll be 90 next year.
Wow.
Brilliant, brilliant clinician. 1973, when Big Pharma's cranking up its statin machinery, Dr. Clavey publishes a very important article that says, well, yeah, cholesterol rises in the state of copper deficiency. That research, if it's replicated by one other lab, if two labs prove the same point, it's called science. 30 labs have replicated that. 30 labs. I've never heard of any other study that's had that level of revelatory repeat. But in any event, again, we're back to this copper iron dynamic. And we're back to early life forms were anaerobic. They made energy, you noted, by fermenting sugar, and they got 2 ATP.
Right.
It's a very inefficient way to make energy. What you may not know is that there's actually 10 enzymes to engage in what's called anaerobic glycolysis.
Okay.
8 of the 10 enzymes require magnesium. Oh, wow. So if you're trying to burn up magnesium, you want to flip to an anaerobic metabolism, and you're going to go right through magnesium, knife through butter. Most people don't know that.
Right.
So in order to have higher life forms, in order to have higher intelligence, in order to have a conversation like you and I are having, and engage in it on a platform using our computers and beam it out to the world, requires greater intelligence. Greater intelligence requires greater energy. As animals evolved, higher intelligence needed to have more energy. And so there's energy in oxygen by its very nature. The oxygen molecule, 2 oxygens come together to form O2, like gas, has energy. And when you oxidize glucose, instead of fermenting it, when you oxidize it, you get as much as 36 ATP. Right. But when you oxidize fat, which we're designed to do, you get 140 ATP. That's a big difference between 2 ATP and 140. Suddenly, miles per gallon, we're humming with 140 miles per gallon. It's incredible. And I want you to know I've read 10,000 articles in the last 14 years. How many articles talked about the production of 140 ATP with 1 unit of one article?
Maybe I've heard once somewhere, but I can't.
No, it's very hard to find published studies that really tell you the truth. The point is, we are designed as a species to be able to oxidize our sugars and oxidize our fats. Now, you brought up the Warburg effect, and people may have heard of Otto Warburg, famous physician and scientist, probably the most accomplished and eccentric clinician on the planet. He was only nominated for a Nobel Prize 52 times.
That's it, just 52.
52. But he only got one. Why? Because Hitler said one was enough. Turns out Otto Warburg was a German Jew.
Yes.
And Hitler kept him around because both Hitler's mother and father died of cancer, and he was convinced that Warburg was going to be able to solve all this cancer habit.
Right.
And lo and behold, he did. It's interesting. He got his Nobel Prize in 1931. I don't know how he said it in German. I really should look this up. But when he got a letter informing him that he had just been acknowledged for his genius, he said, "It's about damn time." He was about as arrogant as you could get. But
Well,
but everyone has, not everyone, many people have heard of the Warburg effect.
mhm,
They have no idea what it's about. And so he gets his Nobel Prize for he isolated what's called the Atmung ferment, the respiration ferment, the respiration chemicals. But what he's referring to is complex 4 of the mitochondria.
right,
And he's the guy that isolated the enzyme that I've referred to, cytochrome C oxidase.
right,
But here's his devilish nature. He referred to it as iron oxidase. Because it has iron in it, he referred to it as iron oxidase, when in fact it is activated by copper. So we drive cars that have a big iron engine, but the engine burns gasoline that requires a spark, right? And we've been taught to honor the gas and the spark, just take the iron block for granted, right? But what he did was he flipped the narrative. He turned black into white. He got people to focus on the iron. Oh, the iron is doing all the work, iron oxidase, and he threw science off for 90 years. And the origin, he did not actually coin the phrase, the Warburg effect. It was scientists actually in the 70s. I think it was 72 when it actually got coined. But most people don't know what it means. What happens is when you're talking about anaerobic glycolysis,
mhm,
the cell is choosing to use anaerobic glycolysis even though oxygen is present.
that's right,
There's only one reason why it chooses to do that, because there's no copper bioavailable with the oxygen. And that's the part that everyone misses, is that the Warburg effect is proof that there's lack of bioavailable copper. And what's killing, quote unquote, killing the copper? The buildup of iron in the tissue. Again, I've read a lot of articles. I've only found one that actually documented with a table that there's 5 times more iron in a cancer cell, a breast cancer cell in this case,
okay,
than a healthy cell next to it.
yeah,
5 times more iron. So what that does is it
yeah,
sucks the energy out of the tissue, and it prevents any way to flip oxygen into water to release the energy molecules. That's the most basic transaction on planet Earth, is turning oxygen. It's not our friend. It's a poison. We need to neutralize that poison, turn it into water so the body can release the energy. And so in a situation where you have cancer metabolism, you have a loss of bioavailable copper, a buildup of iron. And what happens is the mitochondria have been coined energy factories or
yeah,
little furnaces.
yes,
Well, go to Detroit and go to the GM plant, and that's what a mitochondria is. It has its own source of energy, but it's making things. It's making seats and engines and assembling things. And that's what a mitochondria does. And what a mitochondria relies on is energy to do its work. One of the most important things that the mitochondria does is recycle iron. Again, it comes in as a waiter, carrying the oxygen. It dumps its payload, and then it has to be recycled so that it can be brought back to the bone marrow to carry more oxygen.
right,
And if that recycling does not happen in the mitochondria by copper-dependent enzymes, the iron starts to build in the tissue, and then it begins to block the production of energy. And then you are required to move away from oxidation of fuels and go to the anaerobic fermenting of fuels.
fascinating. So here's the interesting thing. Once again, what you're saying uh, is a bit of a revelation. And I don't think we can use this word too much when it comes to because they really should call you the copper man, not the magnesium man.
Yeah.
But this is again so obscure in the common in the zeitgeist when it comes to health. Because when you look at the research on iron and cancer, the focus on what's regulating things is hepcidin. They see that's what you see in all the studies on iron and cancer, right? You see the central player
Right.
in iron overload, especially. I focus on that, not on the anemia thing, but nevertheless, they see hepcidin being upregulated in cancer cells. And they say that's the player, it's hepcidin. Can you talk about
Sure.
this
Boy,
this
but
hepcidin?
I thought you'd never ask. So there are, let's back up. What's an important physiological event for people to understand? You and I have been talking for almost an hour. Every second of every day, every second, our body needs to replace 2.5 million red blood cells. So our spleen, over here on the left side, needs to take 2.5 million red blood cells a second offline so that the bone marrow in our long bones, our thigh bone, hip, and pelvic region, they're making 2.5 million red blood cells a second. In the course of 24 hours, 2 trillion red blood cells that are offline every 24 hours,
Amazing.
like clockwork. I think it's one of the most important facts. If we get past the fact that you gotta turn oxygen into water, hey, we gotta do something to replace all these red blood cells. And here's the part that will surprise your listeners, is that it only takes 25 milligrams of iron. So technically, the average person, average adult, would have 5,000 milligrams. But 25 is a little tiny bit.
Right.
So picture a nutrient capsule.
Yeah.
Holds about 1,000 milligrams. So allegedly we have 5 capsules of iron in our body.
Okay.
But we only need 25 of it in order to replace for the next day. Hey, I only need 25 milligrams. Now here's what will shock your listeners. 24 of the 25 milligrams that are needed every day come from a recycling system. Its formal name is called the reticuloendothelial system.
Okay.
It took me 2 years to figure out what reticuloendothelial meant. It means recycling. That's what it means. And so the mechanism is there's a back door to release the iron so it can be attached to transferrin. Each transferrin can hold 2 molecules of iron.
Okay.
It's got to be in the +3 valence, not +2, +3.
Right.
And goes back to the bone marrow so it can be made into new red blood cells. So that doorway to release the iron is called ferroportin, iron doorway.
To release the iron from the cell.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay.
And that iron doorway is run by a copper dorman. And that copper dorman is a copper enzyme called ferroxidase, iron oxidase, but it can express through either ceruloplasmin or its cousin, Hepcidin. Now, we're throwing out a lot of words here, but
is that named after Hephaestus, the Greek god that made the iron weapons for
exactly.
Achilles, right?
Right,
Yeah,
exactly
yeah.
right. And so Hepcidin is typically what's used to express the ferroxidase enzyme to release the iron for the recycling program.
Okay.
Now, the article that really explains this the best by an Italian researcher named Giovanni Musci, Musci,
I've seen that name.
when you put it into Google, it'll come back music. I have to change it to MUSCI, and it's 2014, and it's called the Ceruloplasmin ferroportin axis.
Okay.
Probably one of the 10 most important articles I've read in my lifetime. Because what he profiles in that article is the positive regulator of iron recycling is bioavailable copper. So bioavailable copper in this situation is expressing as the ferroxidase enzyme. And what does that do? It turns ferrous iron, +2 iron, into +3 iron, so that it can be loaded onto the protein transferrin. Very, very important transaction. Very, very important. Again, think about 2.5 million red blood cells a second. And so that's positive iron regulation. That's the positive regulator. Again, we live in a world of duality. What's white is black. What they've been training us to believe in is hepcidin.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like hepcidin, doesn't it? It's very similar. Hepcidin, hepcidin. And hepcidin, and I was teasing Lawrence before we got started. I said, you realize how many people know what hepcidin is? And he says, probably not many. And that's right, very few. But the point is, hepcidin is a negative regulator of iron. So picture it this way. A positive regulator is like your mom, who made sure that when you were little, you got to school on time. Rest, you were fed, that she was encouraging you and getting you out the door and what have you. That's a positive regulator. Can't thank moms enough for what they did. It's just, we all have our stories, right? What's a negative regulator? A negative regulator would have been a SWAT team dragging you out of bed and kicking you to school the whole way.
Right.
That's a negative regulator.
Right.
Positive regulators and negative regulators are completely different. And what they want you to believe, Lawrence, is that hepcidin as a negative regulator is sweet and really loving, when in fact, what it does is it walls off the ferroportin doorway, shuts it down, and prevents iron from getting out. Now, why would it do that? I mean, it's fascinating. It's like, gosh, that seems like a pretty extreme response. Well, you need to understand where it comes from. It comes from the liver, and it comes from what's called the HAMP gene, HAMP,
Mm-hmm.
hepatic antimicrobial peptide.
Okay.
Hepcidin rises in the face of growing pathogens. Why do pathogens rise? Because iron is rising. Why is iron rising? Because copper is MIA. And so when copper is dropping, hepcidin is rising. It's axiomatic.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
what's happened in the world is copper has dropped to all-time lows. Hepcidin is now rising. And what it does is it prevents iron from getting outside of the cell. And suddenly, iron looks low in the blood work. Well, it's well known, it's very well known that when hepcidin rises, you have what's called anemia of chronic disease. It's also called anemia of chronic inflammation. What's missing in chronic disease and chronic inflammation? Oh yeah, bioavailable copper. And so everything hangs together. And so hepcidin is rising because the body's not stupid. It knows it doesn't have the bioavailable copper, and this is its default mechanism. And doctors and their patients are being trained like circus bears to
Mm-hmm.
believe that hepcidin is their friend when in fact it is not. And I've just read an article a couple weeks ago that raised a very important question. So it's hepcidin is preventing iron from getting outside of the cell because there's a lot of pathogens that like to hang out in the blood. Really important to know that. But there are also pathogens that like to hang out inside the cell. And what the authors raised was, what is rising hepcidin doing to foster the growth of intracellular pathogens? It was a frightening question for them to ask. And most people don't know about inside, outside. It's a really, really critical issue. And so the part that the people don't know, I alluded to it a little while ago. I said that copper combats all enemies: bacteria, fungus, virus, and parasites. All four cave in the presence of copper. Where did I learn that? One of my friends is an Amish dairy farmer,
Okay.
and it took him 6 months to convince me to read books by an animal farmer down in Australia named Pat Colby. And I resisted it. I was very rude. His name is Sam, great guy, probably one of the smartest people on the planet. But I was really rude to Sam. And when he called back on the third time, I happened to have my phone, and I said, "Okay, what are the names of those books?" Four of the most important books I've ever read, and they're Pat Colby, Coleby, Natural Goat Care, Horse Care, Cattle Care, and Sheep Care. And what she points out in her books, no longer with us, she died in 2015. She was an absolute genius. But what she points out, that any animal that is copper deficient would be you and me and everyone that we know, everyone on the planet. Any animal that is copper deficient will have parasites. Any animal that has parasites is copper deficient.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why does hepcidin rise with cancer? Well, I've got a buddy of mine who will go unnamed. He's a business guy like me, has an MBA, but he has a rifle machine. And
Right.
his sideline is treating cancer with his rife machine. And he goes after two parasites that are found in every cancer, knocks them out, and then the person's bingo bongo, okay, then get their life back. Maybe offline we can talk about what the names of those parasites are. But why is hepcidin rising? Because the parasites are feeding off the rising iron in the tissue, right? All pathogens feed on iron. Hepcidin, the body's not stupid. The body says, hey, we don't have any copper. Better go to plan B. Plan B is hepcidin. Hepcidin is going to rise, trying to exercise its activity as a hepatic antimicrobial peptide, trying to kill the pathogens. But it's really designed for outside pathogens, not inside pathogens. And therein lies the conflict. And so if you don't know that copper's the general, iron's the grunt, if you don't know that there's a positive regulator of iron versus a negative regulator, if you don't know that there's parasites in all cancers, that's where the confusion is. And if you don't understand what the Warburg effect is, because it's one of the most important things to understand, that what Pasteur said, there's the Pasteur effect and there's a Warburg effect. Pasteur said that any organism in the presence of oxygen should be able to activate that oxygen.
All right. So hold on. So I got a question for you, because
Sure.
there is a fair bit of evidence out there that antiparasitics kill cancer.
Yes, that's right.
And so I'm curious, is that because antiparasitics raise the level of copper in the body or include copper in the formulation? Or,
Um,
but
Antiparasitics are doing the job of copper. Trust me, Big Pharma is not going to make a drug that's going to introduce copper into our body. That's a fact. There's a lot of chemicals on this planet that chelate copper. I could share my contact list where I've got about 25 of them identified.
Mm-hmm.
If people knew the lengths that big pharma and big chemistry has gone to try to identify chemicals that cause a decrease in copper, they'd say, wow, that doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense. But the antiparasitics are replicating the action of copper, but making sure that there is no introduction of copper.
Gotcha. Okay. Got it. All right. So, and now ceruloplasmin is the protein that slash enzyme, right? But it's the protein that transports the copper.
Okay. So we're back to our mother. Okay. So picture ceruloplasm's like our mom, and picture our mom is on a conference call. She's working on emails on the side on her phone. She's got um, dinner in the oven. She's got the laundry going laundry. And out of the corner of her eye, she sees her 4-year-old child playing with a hammer.
Mm-hmm.
She very quietly uses herself from her conference call, goes over and suggests to Tommy, why don't you play with these blocks instead of the hammer? Because iron is a 4-year-old with a hammer inside our body. And I don't mean to come across sexist. Oh, he's talking about mothers and always just it's a model that we can all relate to.
Mm-hmm.
The point is, ceruloplasmin was discovered in 1948 by two Swedish physiologists, Holmberg and Law. They thought they had discovered the Holy Grail, when in fact they had. And ever since 1948, Big Pharma has been going out of their way to try to demonize it and destroy it. So what does ceruloplasmin do? So hepcidin that we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
do you know how many amino acids are in hepcidin?
No.
Okay. It's a very tiny peptide. It's got 25 amino acids.
Okay.
That's pretty small.
Yeah.
Not the smallest. Smallest I found is 4 peptides. it's called tuftin. But the thing is, hepcidin has 25 amino acids. Ceruloplasmin has 1,066, and there's 8 copper atoms inside. So for the movie watching crowd, if you've ever seen the movie Fury with Brad Pitt,
Mm-hmm.
tank commander, and there's 5 soldiers inside the tank. Well, this tank has 8 soldiers. Just like the tank in that movie, there's a trapdoor in ceruloplasmin. And it's actually a tyrosine trapdoor that if it gets oxidized, the coppers come out like diarrhea. What causes that to happen? Oh, it gets exposed to ascorbic acid, gets exposed to antibiotics, gets exposed to hormone replacement therapy. I could go on for probably about 2 hours naming the chemicals that will cause the trapdoor of ceruloplasmin. Oh, excess sugar, hyperglycemia will cause the sugars, or cause the trapdoor to open. So it's a very sensitive but very important protein. One of its many functions
Mm-hmm.
is to transport copper. So there's 8 inside, 10 on the outside. Why is it transporting copper? Because ceruloplasmin is the supply line for copper inside the mitochondria. That was originally theorized by Earl Frieden back in the 1970s. He was publicly humiliated for that. And in 2017, Zach Baker discovered that he was right. So the thing is, there's a lot of controversy around copper, as you know that and well understand that. But the point is, ceruloplasmin has intelligence, and the the function that it's always identified with in the literature is the ferro-oxidase enzyme function, that it can flip ferrous iron into ferric so it can be attached to either transferrin or iron can be stored into ferritin. So they've reduced ceruloplasmin to this widget, when in fact it's probably the most intelligent chemical in our body, being run by 8 copper. There is no other structure in our body that has that much copper in it. That would imply that it has incredible intelligence. The blood test that we routinely do for ceruloplasmin will always measure its level. Level is akin to height. Does height of someone have any indication of its intelligence?
No,
No. How tall are you, Lawrence?
I'm 5'6".
Okay, I'm 6 foot. So it would suggest that I'm smarter than you because I'm a little taller, right? No, that's not true at all. We know that's not true. And the blood test, in order to identify the intelligence of ceruloplasmin, in order to identify its enzyme expression, capacity for full enzyme expression, is not allowed by the FDA, against the law. In fact, there are 5 sensitive tests to measure the bioavailability of copper.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is called the colorimetric assay for ferroxidase.
Mm-hmm.
All 5 of those tests are barred by the FDA. Yeah, I wonder why. Because if doctors knew that copper was not doing its job, was not able to do its job, was being overwhelmed by iron, the gig would be up. The game would be over. And the part that people don't fully understand, maybe by the time we're done with this conversation or series of conversations, every negative health event in our body is caused by iron-induced oxidative stress. That's a fancy way of saying rust.
Yeah.
Why is that happening? Because there isn't enough bioavailable copper. And copper's gift to all life forms on the planet is it's able to regulate oxygen and iron at the same time. There's no other element on the planet that can do that. And so this is very threatening information to an industry makes its living off of problems, makes its living off of fatigue, cellular energy deficiency.
Right.
And so the iron is building in people's tissue. They're not aware of it. There's an emotional component. My guess is that there may have been, in your situation with your kidneys, there may have been something that triggered from your past that you became afraid of. I don't know that, but very often fear is attached to the kidney. In the same way that anger is attached to the liver, in the same way that worry is attached to the spleen, and so on and so forth. But there may have been an emotional component that drove the physical component. And when I started this work many years ago, I
Mm-hmm.
was completely Newtonian. It's all physical, you need some minerals and vitamins and everything's fine. Now, 15 years later, I'm all quantum. It's usually emotional, triggers the physical event. And so the one specialty that will acknowledge functional anemia, it's an important phrase, functional anemia, is associated with chronic kidney disease. And what does functional anemia mean? That's code for, gosh, there isn't enough copper to run the iron, and the person's presenting with anemia, and so we're going to give them iron even though what they really need is copper. And so people who have chronic kidney disease get to stage 4 and they need dialysis, right?
Right.
What people don't know is that dialysis comes in 2 flavors. The dialysis machines ignore the copper. Another set of dialysis machines chelate the copper. And the machines that chelate the copper cause this functional anemia, cause iron to look low in the blood, even though it's stuck in the tissue, especially the kidney tissue.
Right.
The person gets an iron infusion and starts to build up, and eventually it will cause their death.
That's right. Amazing. Amazing. So, okay. So much to talk about here, but
I'm trying to picture your listeners right now. They're like,
yeah, so I'm going to try to stay focused on this. We'll definitely have to have a follow-up conversation. But here's the thing. So ceruloplasmin, again, most people have never heard of it. Just
right.
like most people don't realize that
Most doctors have never heard of it.
okay, there you go. I'm going to test out my doctor next time for sure. So my understanding, because now I want to get into retinol, vitamin A. My understanding is that vitamin A or retinol is crucial for ceruloplasmin to
Yes, it is.
synthesize ceruloplasmin. So
Well,
can we talk about how vitamin A and retinol plays into this whole into the ceruloplasmin, copper, that let's
how much time do we have?
about
Retinol is very, very important. So when we say
about 30
retinol,
minutes.
okay, when we say retinol, we're talking about animal-based vitamin A. So it's you have precursors to retinol and you have preformed retinol.
Okay.
So animal-based is preformed retinol or vitamin A. The precursors are beta-carotenes. They come in plants. Very different form. And there's something called a retinol equivalency unit, and it takes 12 beta-carotene to equal one retinol molecule. So when people are taking their supplements, you see that they're getting vitamin A, they're getting their RDA for retinol. They turn around the bottle, they'll see that it's got 10,000 units of vitamin A. Well,
Yep.
what that is it's a form of vitamin A that's based on beta carotenes. You have to divide by 12. People are getting a lot less than they realize.
Mm.
But back in the day, our ancestors were not afraid of food, and they were regularly eating yard eggs. They were eating grass-fed butter. They were eating grass-fed heavy cream. They were eating beef liver, grass-fed beef liver, and many of them were raised on cod liver oil, which is a very rich source of retinol. So those are the 5 richest sources of retinol. What people need to understand is that supplemental D that you're drowning yourself with blocks the uptake of retinol. And you're like, well, I'm not worried about that because I'm more worried about my D because I know it's going to strengthen my immune system. If you believe that, I've got to use BMW. I'd love to say.
Mm.
Well, the thing is, vitamin D is not your friend. Vitamin A, I say, is 100 times more important than vitamin D. That might be a whole nother conversation for us to have. But let's get back to the story. Retinol is insanely important. And to your point about making ceruloplasmin, turns out there are 2 very important enzymes in our body that are they're copper pumps. They literally are pumping copper into enzymes to make sure that they work properly. To my knowledge, there's no other mineral that has pumps making sure that the mineral gets into the enzymes. But these pumps are called ATP7A and 7B. Now, people may know them as 7A is the Menkes gene, 7B is the Wilson's disease gene.
Right.
Your doctor will know that.
That's right.
They won't know what it means, but they'll recognize ceruloplasmin or Wilson's disease. It was on their board. They had to know that answer so they could get their license.
Right.
That's where their knowledge would stop, and they have no idea after that. But the point is, these pumps need a source of energy, and that's supplied by retinol. Again, read a lot of articles. One, Cousins and Barber, 1987, revealed the truth of retinol gets conjugated. For those who are familiar with languages, you got to conjugate verbs, right? Latin, Italian, we got to be able to conjugate. We've got to be able to conjugate retinol into what are called retinoids. And they come in different flavors.
Mm.
There's a whole series of chemicals called retinoic acids.
Right.
There's a whole series of nuclear receptors, RARs, RORs, RXRs, RYRs, and your doctor's never heard of that. And what you don't know is that the retinoic acids, hormones, some of the most powerful hormones in our body. Well, 13 CIS, 13 cis-retinoic acid, is in fact the catalyst to make ATP 7A and 7B work so they can load copper. 7B loads copper into the protein we've been talking about, ceruloplasmin,
Mm.
and 7A loads all the rest. There's a bunch of enzymes. So it gives you an idea of how important ceruloplasmin is if one pump is focusing on that. And then there's another pump that's putting out maybe scores, maybe hundreds of enzymes. The research is very sketchy about that. But the point is, you can't make copper bioavailable until it's put into the enzyme so it can work. And so when I'm talking about bioavailable copper, I'm talking about the 1-2 punch of retinol and copper in the diet. It's the cornerstone of the root cause protocol. Got to have copper, got to have retinol. But it's not beta carotene. It's free-form, animal-based retinol that is the full deal.
Mm.
Now, what you especially will be interested in learning is what's the biological origin of the Warburg effect? You're a gearhead. You
Inflammation.
want to no. You want to know, right? You want to know, where did the Warburg effect really happen? When we get inside the mitochondria,
Right.
there are 5 complexes. 4 of them are called the electron transport genes,
Right.
Roman 1 through 4.
Right.
And when they are combined with Roman 5, which is ATP synthase, that combination of 5 complexes is called oxidative phosphorylation.
Phosphorylation. Right.
All right. Now, between complex 3
Mm-hmm.
and complex 4 is something called a signalosome. You've never heard of
No.
it. No one on your side of the fence has ever heard of it. No one's physician's ever heard of it. But this was written up by Dr. Hammerling, 2016, all one word, Hammerling, 2016, talking about the role of retinol in the signalosome. What the signalosome does is ensure the transmission of electrons from complex 3 to complex 4. Really, really important. The electron, for the curious few, go into Wikipedia and look up retinol. You'll see that it has a diamond back designed to it, and the electrons on the back of retinol to get from complex 3 to complex 4. Well, why is that important? Well, what Dr. Hammerling points out is that when there isn't retinol present between complex 3 and complex 4,
Mm-hmm.
you get what's called the Warburg effect. Suddenly, you can no longer metabolize oxygen because retinol is not there to enable copper to do its job.
Right.
Now, why is that important?
Well,
it's important because in 1925, famous physician, his name is Montrose T. Burroughs, got his medical degree from Johns Hopkins in 1909. He was working at the Rockefeller Institute. For those of people who know what the Rockefeller Institute, your fingers should be tightening up right about now. But in 1925, Dr. Burroughs wrote an article declaring that retinol deficiency causes cancer. Then in 1926, he wrote 4 articles, 1926A, 26B, 26C, 26D, further documenting the fact that when retinol is deficient, when the electrons can't flow, it affects the copper, and you got to go anaerobic glycolysis. Something very significant happened in 1926. There was a conflict between Otto Warburg
mm-hmm.
and a gentleman named Johannes Fibiger. Fibiger was I think he was from the Netherlands. And they were fighting over what's the source, what's the cause of cancer.
Right.
Warburg, of course, was arguing that it was metabolic.
Right.
Fibiger said, no, it's a parasite.
Wow.
And in 1926, the Nobel Committee did not make a decision. They did not make their decision until 1927 and awarded it to Fibiger, which enraged Warburg because Warburg has an ego.
Yeah.
Warburg knew he was right. And so this is 4 years before he gets his Nobel in 1931. His Nobel had nothing to do with cancer. But the point is, in 1927, Fibiger gets the Nobel, but he recounts his theory that it's caused by a parasite. And I don't know whether he knew of Montrose burrows or not, but he publishes an article asserting that retinol deficiency causes cancer, and within a year, he's dead.
So, yeah. Okay. So I was looking, okay. So here's the thing. I was looking into this. Not what you just said there, but that's just fascinating. Here's the thing. It's, funny how it looped back to parasitics, but back to the Warburg effect.
Right.
When you see, I thought you meant when you asked me, how do we get the Warburg effect? I'm looking back at what starts triggering things, and it's, I'm saying inflammation, reactive oxygen species, oxidative stress begins the whole chain of events.
Yep.
Right. So that's what I was trying to communicate. But what you've just described there is right, because I mean, I literally have this question for you, like sitting here that I wrote thinking about this. So it's this, it seems like a retinol deficiency can lead to cancer risk in two ways.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
One, retinol deficiency leads to reduced ceruloplasmin, impairing its ability to oxidize iron for transport.
Right.
This can cause iron overload, oxidative stress, disrupting the mitochondrial function, shifting cellular metabolism towards glycolysis. Boom, 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 boom. Or retinol deficiency, again, decreased ceruloplasmin, therefore lack of bioavailable copper due to a retinol deficiency undermines the function of complex 4 in mitochondria. This affects oxidative phosphorylation, reducing ATP production, and again promoting a metabolic shift to glycolysis, which is associated with cell proliferation and oncogenesis.
And those are just what we know.
So I was going to ask you, right?
There may be other factors.
So there may be other factors, but again, I have to use this term revelation, because who understands that again, it's not in the zeitgeist that vitamin A,
By design, it's not in the zeitgeist, by design.
by design, right? So the reality here is that how important vitamin A is. Because it's true, we are, even I, up until recently, again, and I have to thank you, because it's you that's educating a lot of people, including myself, on these issues. But I'm focusing huge on the importance of like you said, like vitamin D, right? Because vitamin D, see, here's the thing, research has shown a connection between vitamin D deficiency and various cancers, right? So they see in prostate, in my
correlation, all big correlation, not big causation.
So here's the crazy thing. So I don't believe in taking D3 supplements. I get my vitamin D from the sun, right?
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, and I'm wondering now, the connection between, because we know how powerful retinoic acid is for the skin that's been photo damaged.
Absolutely. No, again, people don't realize. I'm so excited that you're name is in black and white behind you. People don't realize how simple they flip the narrative
Mm-hmm.
and they turn white into black and black into white. And people are like, no, it can't be that simple. That's the whole point. They're gonna go after the most important mineral in our body that is it's the Achilles heel of our body. And it, again, we have 100 milligrams of copper. And truth be known, we actually have way more than 5,000 milligrams of iron, but let's just stay at 5,000.
Right.
That's a 50-to-1 ratio. It's a 50-to-1 ratio. But this lowly little copper has sway over the sea of iron. People don't know that. And their doctors don't know that. Why don't their doctors know that? Because there's no money in healthy humans.
Well,
Now,
that,
Lawrence, I'm going to ask a favor.
yeah,
Can we just pause for 2 seconds while I make a quick I
go
forgot
for
to
it.
message someone real quick. I'll be right
Yep.
back.
Go
Promise.
for it. I'm going to
Okay.
pause the recording.
Okay, thanks. I think what we have to understand here, Lawrence, I really want to commend you for your desire to understand and to be able to convey this to your followers. 99% of people don't have an idea what we're talking about. And what people want is easy. And there's a phrase that I use in my presentations: simple lie versus the complex truth. And it's reputed or recorded that Lao Tzu said that in like 600 BC. So it's been on the planet a long time. Simple lie, complex truth. And you and I have been deeply engaged up to our waders in complex truth. And the average listener, it's like, just tell me what to do. What's really going on? And I think to me, what I appreciate is your desire to try to tease this out so people can follow it. Because I think it's important to know, how did we get it so wrong? How were we misled and misfed? That's the phrase that I love to talk about. We've been misled and misfed. I think it's important for people to realize that we were naive and very, very trusting in our belief that the system was there to take care of us. The system was there to feed us. The system was there to provide medications for us. When in fact, now what we're realizing is maybe there's a whole different story. And maybe they did flip the narrative. Black is white, white is black. And in fact, the doctors, I used to be very critical of doctors in the beginning. The first couple of years, I was very hard on doctors. And one of my followers said, Morley, you're being too hard on the doctors. They didn't learn this in medical school. And I backed off and I said, you're right. They didn't. And I know that, and I acknowledge that. I said, but neither did I. I went to business school, but I couldn't stand the insanity of the system. And so I kept asking questions, picking, until I found what became this thread of truth that relates to the dynamic between copper and iron that affects magnesium, affects calcium, other minerals. And the average person has no idea that all this is related. So I'm just delighted to have this conversation. I'm worrying about the backwash in your community, people trying to process what we're talking about. Okay.
Yeah, I'm muted. Okay. Um, Absolutely. And then, so, and there's because you just mentioned magnesium, and calcium, there's vitamin E, there's the vitamin D, rabbit hole, all of that. But in the spirit of giving the listeners what
Right.
they really want, which is, hey, simple why, yes, like yourself, I'm driven to understand the layers beneath and how we get there and tease it out and really, right. I want to know the steps. I want to know the what. I want to know, all the puzzle pieces so that I better understand the answer. Why is that the why? Like why,
Let me make a suggestion on your diagram. I love your diagram. I absolutely love it. There's only one change I would make. the Alpha Human Project, Alpha Human Podcast,
Mhm.
Victory Through Integrity.
Victory through integrity. Yeah, yeah.
That's what we're talking about here. What is the metabolic integrity of the human body? And you cannot approach and understand the integrity of the human metabolism until you understand bioavailable compounds. It
Okay.
is virtually impossible.
All right. So here's the thing. Yeah. So you and I are fascinated by the complexities. We really want to. It's not good enough for me to simply get the answer. I want to know the whys behind it,
Yeah.
and so that's great. But again, like you said, the listeners are like, man, it's ceruloplasmin. What does that mean? What does that do? Copper? How does that? I don't understand. So let's in the spirit of giving people what they want.
Right.
Let's talk about the solutions, right? Because and let's use. I want to use me as a case study here because there are a lot of people that can relate to what I'm going through, and
Right.
hopefully can benefit from my journey,
Right.
which is why I do what I do with these episodes, with these podcasts. Probably, why you do what you do. We want to help people. So I'm gonna give you the case study here, right?
Mhm.
And then let's show people, hey, look, here's how we address this kind of thing. So we've already mentioned the cancer. So really interesting development for myself about 6 months ago. My liver enzymes showed up as being elevated,
Mhm.
really elevated. Like so, ALT getting up to like 190.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, AST getting up into the close to 80,
Mhm.
which was really puzzling, given that I watch my diet carefully, super carefully.
Yeah.
I do not consume any alcohol. And I thought, what the hell is this? What's going on here, right? And so I thought I'm like, look, this is real simple. I'm pretty much on a carnivore diet with a tiny little bit of fruit. I've been eating, just a few foods for almost 8 years now. So what's changed that could lead to this? And so I thought to myself, this might be due to a plantar's wart that I had because the doctor that I was the podiatrist prescribed a foot cream. Now I don't take any pharmaceuticals, okay, at all. And
Right.
I've done a ton of research on cancer drugs, tyrosine kinase inhibitors, ferroptosis inducers, antiparasitics. And if I were to ever use a prescription medication, which is unlikely, but if I were, I would research the heck out of it before even considering whether or not I would consume it. But I never even thought to check into a damn foot cream. What
No,
harm
why
could
would
a
you?
foot cream do? Well, as it turned out, what the podiatrist gave me was a skin cancer drug called imiquimod. And as you would have it, one of the side effects of imiquimod, as I came to find out, is altered liver function. So I stopped it immediately. And after a few weeks, my ALT went down to 130. The AST went down to like in the 50s. And I thought, hey, I'm getting it under control. Fantastic. I'm getting those liver enzymes back to normal. However, a few weeks later, numbers shoot back up. Numbers shoot
Hmm.
back up. They go up to 177, then they go up to into the 190s again. So now I'm thinking, okay, there's two other confounding factors here that are playing around in the back of my mind at this point. Number one, over the past few months, I've been training like a savage. I mean, 2 or 3 times a day, high intensity resistance training, strength training, lifting weights, etc. And ALT and AST is not only stored in the liver, it's stored in muscle tissue as well.
Yeah, that's
So,
true. Yeah.
right. So when muscle breaks down, it releases ALT and AST. So I thought, hey, that could be messing with the levels seen in the blood
Right.
test. The other thing I thought might play a role is that, okay, hold on a second. For the last 7 years, I've had no sugar. I've had no fructose. I've had no fruit. Okay. And like I said, I've been on a ketogenic diet, carnivore diet for a very long time because I was obsessed with the fact of of cancer being driven
Right.
by glucose, right? And so, hey, avoid sugar at all costs. And so when I stumbled upon a study that analyzed the metabolic features of chromophobe kidney cancer, which is what I have. And it turns out that, in fact, chromophobe cancer is one of the few cancers that does not upregulate glucose. It does not upregulate fatty acid. It does not upregulate amino acids. It doesn't even upregulate gluconeogenesis. The way chromophobe cancer gets its nutrients is from the lysosome and the autophagic cell recycling machinery, right? It cannibalizes the dead cells and the broken cells, which is probably why it grows slower than a lot of other cancers. Okay. So, all right, when I stumbled upon that study, I'm like, holy shit. I'm not, I probably don't have to worry too much about excess glucose in my system because the chromophobe cancer really isn't using it. So I added some fructose in the form of fruit to the diet. And I thought to myself, it could be a combination of breaking down all that muscle tissue from the workouts and all of a sudden, for the first time in 7 years, introducing fructose to my diet because it has to be broken down by the liver. Although I recently saw a study that says up to a certain degree of fructose is actually metabolized in the small intestine to shield the liver from fructose. Only up to a certain amount. I think it's like the small intestine can metabolize 1 gram of fructose for every kilogram of body weight. I believe that's the case. But anyway, nevertheless, I stopped working out 3 times a day, right? I'm only doing 1 time a day now. I brought the fruit intake way down. I was doing like 6, 7 pieces of fruit a day. I brought it down to like 2 or 3 pieces a day. And lo and behold, ALT, AST goes back down. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm figuring it out. I've got this thing licked again. And then I go back in for more tests, more blood tests.
Right.
And it's 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later. And once again, the ALT, now it's up at 210, AST's up at 100.
Wow.
And they ordered a whole bunch of blood work around the liver, right? They see ferritin comes in at 880.
Oh, whoa.
Ferritin, okay. And what else do they show? They show that I also have one of the mutations of the HFE gene, which plays a crucial role in regulating iron absorption in the body and is associated with hemochromatosis.
And let's just stay with that for a second. What that mutation does is it causes hepcidin production to be lowered in the body.
Right.
That will confuse the heck out of your body.
Yeah. So in light of that, and I'm not necessarily surprised about the high ferritin given I've had kidney cancer, which again upregulates iron, right? So you've got this, and obviously now I could see so my blood work shows that I'm a carrier of one of the HFE gene mutations. So maybe the high ferritin is no surprise, but I've never had high ALT ever. I've never had high AST.
What's your age, Lawrence?
57.
So get out your calculator, multiply 57 times 365.
57 times 365.
365.
57. All right, let's do it. 57 times 365 equals 20,805.
Right. That's an approximation about how much iron you have. You have 20,000 milligrams of iron in a idealized body. Turns out we accumulate 1 milligram of iron every day we're on the planet.
Okay.
And this is not my theory. This is the great minds, Robert Crichton, Douglas Kell, Gutteridge and Hollowell, Jamie Collins. These are the iron biologists of great repute. Iron accumulates in our tissue as we age.
Right.
You've experienced cancer metabolism, which accelerates aging. because the cancer cells are ravenous, not for sugar, they're ravenous for iron because they're going back to an earlier life form,
Right.
right? And so that's absolutely fascinating.
Oh, so wait,
Okay. Oh, there's more. Okay. All right.
right? So now there's right. So then what happens during while all this is going on, the MRIs that I do every 4 to 6 months, right? To
Right.
monitor the right, since I've had cancer, I get monitored, right?
Sure. Sure.
So at the same time that all this is happening, my MRIs come back, and what do they see? They see mild liver steatosis,
Okay. Right. That
non
makes sense.
right, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, mild, but it wasn't there 4 months ago.
So
So
go ahead. Finish your thought. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
okay, so that's the landscape. And what I want to do now for the listeners that are out there that are either dealing with cancer or dealing with, altered liver function, right? Or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Now let's talk about, given what we understand, given what you understand, let's talk about how these kinds of things get addressed with the root cause protocol.
So let's talk quickly about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, fastest growing disease on the planet,
Yes.
non-alcoholic fat. And so when you pull back the curtain on that condition, there's three factors in play: lack of copper, lack of retinol, excess iron. And there are many authors who are honing in on those three vectors.
Mm,
Not everyone does,
okay.
but the right ones do. And of course, that's not taught in doctor school. And so liver disease, the liver was originally designed by our maker and Mother Nature to be a repository for copper and retinol.
Okay.
What it's been turned into is a depot for iron. What they've known since 1928, March of 1928 at University of Wisconsin, and May of 1928 at University of Kentucky, two separate studies, months apart. They withheld copper from the animal's diet, and the animals accumulated iron where? In their liver, first and foremost. And it's so the liver is on the right side, but it's a triangle. And it
Yeah.
comes to a point around the middle of your belly. Well, there's a section, it's a triangle within a triangle. And the smaller triangle, which is in the center of your body, is where ceruloplasmin is made. It's called the left lobe of the liver.
So hold on a second. Keep in mind, they removed a tumor from my liver a year and a half ago, right? So they took a piece out of my liver and they took the gallbladder, right?
Sure.
Right.
Yep.
And that was the only time I ever had high liver enzymes, is when they did that. After 6 months, it went back to normal, right? But again, so lack of copper,
Lack of retinol.
lack of
So
retinol, increased,
as
right?
soon as you don't have enough copper in your diet, you will accumulate iron. What people don't realize is how missing copper has been in our diet for 100 years. Certainly, with the advent of commercial farming
Mhm.
and the accelerated advent of glyphosate, copper's MIA.
Mm,
Iron is accumulating in our tissue all the while. And so, liver building with iron, it's designed to store copper and retinol, but it's building with iron. What does that do? It causes magnesium loss. Iron increases oxidative stress.
mhm.
What does oxidative stress do? It burns up magnesium, called the magnesium burn rate. The enzyme to make storage D and active D. So storage D is made in the liver, active D is made in the kidney,
Mhm.
but storage D is made in the liver. And that enzyme 25 hydroxylase
Right.
requires magnesium, ding, ding, ding. So if people don't know that their low copper is causing iron to rise, is causing magnesium loss, is causing their vitamin D to appear low. The question that's not being asked in doctors' offices is, why is my vitamin D low? That's the missing question. Why is my vitamin D low? Why is my iron low in the blood, doctor? And they don't know. And that's the problem, is that what we've been talking about is the answer to those why questions. The average person doesn't know to ask it. And so in your situation, your liver enzymes, as soon as liver enzymes rise in one of my clients' bodies, I know they have unchecked iron accumulation in their liver. And what's happening is the liver cells are called hepatocytes, hepatic liver. Hepatocytes are filling with iron and blowing up. And that's why the enzymes are rising, because the cells are blowing up and they're spilling their guts into the bloodstream. Sorry to be so graphic, but the point is, the steatosis is an indication of low copper, low retinol, building iron.
Mm.
And what the listener needs to understand is that iron accumulation causes aging. Bioavailable copper causes longevity. There's a difference between longevity and aging. They are, in fact, polar opposites,
Right.
as polar as black and white in your diagram, right? And so we are living in a world that is convinced it needs more iron, needs to get rid of the copper, when in fact the truth is just the opposite. And so in your body, the medication you took, I would be willing to bet what it did was it either introduced zinc or it chelated copper. And that's why it causes liver disease, because the liver lives on a fine balance between these minerals. And when it started to first express, it first started to snowball, is what actually happened.
So you think the imiquimod triggered this whole series of events?
Well, it's an obvious. It would, as Sherlock Holmes, it would be the first thing I would look at.
Occam's razor, right?
Razor, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Fair enough.
Occam knows that it's missing copper that's causing the problems.
So for all those out there that are facing, again, similar issues, there's a lot of people who have these issues. We need to get on the retinol, right? From food-based retinol,
Right.
right? And then do we also look into supplemental copper, or will the retinol from the food start to help us, start to help synthesize more bioavailable copper within the body?
Prior to 2020, I believed that there was a way by going to organic farmers, regenerative farmers, everything was fine.
Mm-hmm.
Post 2020, I'm very skeptical whether the food system can supply the minerals we need. The root cause protocol profiled in the book,
Mm-hmm.
go to the website rcp123.org.
Mm-hmm.
Asked to be able to download the stops and starts. There's 12 stops,
Yes.
15 starts in phases. There's 3 phases. That's the 1, 2, 3, three phases. But here's the catch. We're going to tell you in the stops, stop taking vitamin D. Stop taking calcium. Stop taking iron supplements. Stop taking synthetic B vitamins. Stop taking ascorbic acid. And there's a whole series of things we tell you, stop doing that, because it's undermining your body's innate wisdom to heal itself.
People are like, what do you mean stop taking vitamin D and vitamin C?
I know.
Stop taking calcium.
There's a whole chapter, folks, in this book on vitamin C and vitamin D.
Okay, so here's the deal.
Stop.
So first of all, I highly recommend your website. There is so much information in there on the subjects that we're talking about, where you can dive deep and really truly get to understand this stuff. I've seen the 12 or 14 stops and the starts. Powerful, powerful stuff. So I highly recommend people go to your site and dig into this stuff.
But here's what's new, Lawrence. When the book was written, it was 2020.
Okay.
It was about 3 months into 2020 when I figured out what COVID really stood for. COV stands for coppers vanished. ID stands for irons regulated. And most people don't know what minerals are, so they're like, what's he talking about? But the thing is, that campaign was designed to lower copper, to weaken humanity. And when that happened, that's when I decided to make my own copper supplement called Recuperate.
Okay.
It's not written about, you won't see it in the book.
Okay.
What you want to do is go to a website called Activate FIQ, stands for Formula IQ, Activate FIQ.
Okay.
And you're gonna, what pops up, that you can find is Recuperate. But there's a whole series of supplements now that support the RCP, support the stops and starts from that company. It's just a wonderful starting point for people who really want to take this dialogue that we're having to heart and and bring traction into their lifestyle and introduce these minerals and these supplements.
Okay. So this is fascinating stuff. I love it. Uh, Morley, you're a treasure trove of insight and information. What I want to do is I definitely want to have a follow-up where, because I'm going to be doing more blood work, right? I want
I
to
think
come
you need
out.
to do my full Monty, and we'll analyze your blood results.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So for the listeners, what Morley's referring to is that he has a couple of blood panels that he recommends. You sent them to me, right? I'm gonna do one the full Monty panel. I'm gonna
Yeah.
do that panel, and then we'll do an episode looking at those results. And at that point, we can dig into a few more rabbit holes.
Well, for the listeners' benefit, you talk about a ferritin of over 800.
That's right.
Um, the range that we use within the RTP is between 20 and 50. I like to see it between 20 and 30. And when did I wake up about this problem was when my wife, Dr. Liz, back
Mhm.
in 2018, said, you've been talking to a lot of people about their iron. Have you done your iron blood work? I went, no, I should probably do that. So when my panel came back and my ferritin was 237,
Mhm.
the good thing I was wearing brown pants that day, it terrified me about what was going on in my body, in my liver.
Mhm.
My liver was struggling. And so that's what really galvanized me to say, we got to get on top of this problem. And so one of the cornerstones of the root cause protocol, doing blood donations, we'll talk more about that.
Yeah.
But I want the listener to understand that in a woman's body, if ferritin is above 150,
Mhm.
alarm bells are going off. When it gets above 300, alarm bells are going off for the men. 800 that's a significant
Yeah.
presence of ferritin in the blood. And guess how much ferritin is supposed to be in the blood? That much. None.
Wonderful.
People don't know that. There's many iron biologists who know the truth. Point is, what's happening in the world, doctors are being trained to measure people's iron status, ferritin blood test. And that's patently wrong. And they're misinterpreting it. I have gone on record to rename that test. It's not a ferritin test, it's an errortin test.
Huh.
More errors are being made based on low ferritin because they don't understand that when ferritin is low, hepcidin is high. Why is the hepcidin high? Because there's pathogens and the spleen knows it and is trying to keep the ferritin low, allowing the hepcidin to get high. And it gets into very important dynamics that we started out with. But I want the listeners to know that if you have a ferritin above 50, above 100, above 200, you have a significant dysregulation in your liver and your spleen. It is correctable through blood donation and the root cause protocol, focusing on the supplements that we talk about. But I don't want people to say, oh yeah, that 880, that's okay. No, it's not okay. The highest I've heard of
Yeah.
is over 1500.
Well,
And
I just spoke to someone who has, I listen to me. I just spoke to someone who has hemochromatosis and they have a ferritin level of like 3,300.
well, the doctor should know that people in that caliber need to be doing blood donations maybe every other week, or certainly.
So in our next episode, we're going to talk about phlebotomy. We're going to talk about IP6.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, we're going to talk
Absolutely.
about that. So Morley, I look forward to the next time we talk and we dig further into these issues and go down these rabbit holes, but ultimately in service to those that are suffering with these issues that are correctable, that are fixable, if they are willing to explore and investigate, do the research, because victory through insight, the Alpha Human Podcast, victory through integrity, right, in your approach. And I have to say, before we go, do me a favor, let everyone know again how they can find you.
Um, there's two social media. There's MAG Facebook group. There's also Instagram. The website that I mentioned, rcp123.org. We've got an RCP community. You can, and I'm regularly active in that. There's actually an online training program that we're enrolling people now. It'll start in February. That may be something people are interested in. RCP Institute. And then finally, this is when the podcast hosts freak out, is when I give out my email and phone number. It's Morley Robbins
Do
at
it.
gmail.com, Morley Robbins at gmail.com. Phone number 847-922-8061. And I regularly get calls throughout the day, throughout the week. People always develop hypoxia. Oh my God, you actually answered.
Picked up the phone.
And so I'm happy to answer your questions. I want to do what I can to support people understanding the process. I'm thrilled to have this kind of conversation with you, Lawrence, because you get it. You ask great questions. You drill into the details, and this is teachable stuff. People just need to be willing to learn it. The most important variable for getting well, bar none, most important variable. Do you believe in your body's natural ability to heal itself? Do you have this fervent belief in your own body's ability? And what's been missing throughout your whole life, the nutrients that the body relies on to make energy, to signal, to communicate, to do the transactions that need to take place. When you reintroduce those, the body knows exactly what to do. There's a blueprint for recovery, for staying in balance. But it's based on key nutrients that are in the book, they're in the protocol, and you believe in that wisdom within, you'll be amazed at what happens.
Powerful stuff. Morley Robbins, Root Cause Protocol, Alpha Human Podcast, Lawrence Rosenberg. We are out. Thank you so much, Morley. We'll speak again soon.
Forward to it.